Welcome to our first broadcast of 2023. It's really exciting. We're in a new year. I'm Dawn Alward. I'm here with my co-host Barb Wallace, and we're super stoked to have Renee Wallace back in the house today because she's our founding member.
I keep putting that up there, and I apologize.
Yeah, why is it going? We're not done yet.
Oh my God,
this is started.
For those of you who don't know, this has been a very technically challenged morning because it is our show.
It is, and we're consistent. Yeah. So, Renee, probably much to her regret, Barb and I on board last year to step into the story, and then since then, it's kind of like the Three Musketeers being back together again. But since then, Renee's been a wee bit busy writing books and promoting books, and then writing the next book. So it's really great to have you back, Renee.
Thank you for having me. I miss you guys. It just all came back in a big wash of technical difficulties.
Guarantee you feel right at home. Way better than what this is coming out as.
Hey, well, like we were saying earlier, the most important thing is to have a good time, and we always do that, no matter what happens. So, all right, so we're going to do a brief catch up and ask you, how were your holidays?
How were your holidays, Renee?
They were busy. I actually worked retail these holidays. I needed, after 2.5, 3 years of being in lockdown, I just needed to be around people. And there were many days I regretted making that decision. I mean, it's the general public, but in general, it was a lot of fun. It was great to meet people. I know in my former life, you guys know, I was a makeup artist for Chanel Beauty, and I've worked for Estee Lauder and Bobbi Brown. And so I got to actually do makeovers and sell fragrances. So it was a lot of fun. And I can tell you, people were out and about. You can tell that everyone, not just me, wanted to be out. So that was fun. I got to meet and greet a lot of people.
I kind of miss working retail. This is the first year in a long time I didn't work retail for Christmas at the bookstore, and I kind of missed it. I thought they were going to call me back, but they said, no, we didn't want to give you a chance to work on your manuscript. So I have to say, okay, yay. But yeah, I missed it, but it was a nice holiday. Quiet. We were in Vermont, so it was.
Oh, lovely.
Okay. I also miss retail at Christmas, which is really funny because I hate shopping. But working retail at Christmas is different. It's busy, and like the crew that I used to work with, I used to either like sell chocolate at Lindt or books at Indigo. So both of those things are lovely. So it was always fun, but also really tiring. And I was already like super tired in December. So I'm really glad that this is the second year I think I haven't worked retail. But yeah, so my youngest has been home. So she was home for Christmas. And then we just finished New Year's, where my oldest and her boyfriend came down for New Year's. And we played some games and had some good champagne. And that was pretty fun. So I'm still kind of this is still feeling like a day off. But it was a good holiday.
That's explaining the technical difficulties. We're technically still on vacation. So.
Right? I know Daryl too, he doesn't go back till tomorrow, and I'm like, So what we're really here to talk about is Renee's new book, which is The Secret Society of Salzburg. This is what it looks like. That just came out on the 27th of December. So Renee, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the book's about?
So it's a dual timeline, but not your typical dual timeline where there's a modern day story and a historical story. It's sort of two historical time periods, and it spans about a 10-year period during the interwar years and World War II. It's obviously a World War II book. It's my heart. And it's set in Austria with this Austrian international superstar, kind of a prodigy in the opera arts. And then this common, normal British typist who develop a friendship. And through their friendship, they begin this secret network, almost like an underground railroad, to help Jewish men, women, and children escape Europe during a time when really before the Holocaust, well, at least it started, and then continuing on during the war. just trying to get them. I did not realize till I started researching how hard it was to get out of Europe and to get their visas and the paperwork and to get the countries to accept them, these new refugees. So it's a refugee story, really.
Yeah. I just want to say that I really love this one. I love the characters. It was very different from The Widows of Champagne, which was more of a resistance story rather than a refugee story. But it was lovely. Like I flipped through it in like very, very quickly.
I really loved Elsa, the opera singer.
Yeah.
She had a very warm heart. She really did. And I think, and I know Barb's going to talk about this in a little bit, but one of the things that really stood out for me right from the beginning was how you structured it and how you paced it, because we'd be going along in, say, for example, the 1933, 1934 time period at the beginning. And then just when, you know, things sort of just, you know, you're going along and then it's just, maybe I'll go cook supper. And then all of a sudden it's like 1943 and I'm like, oh. And it just, those were so well timed to just like keep the tension going and keep that pace going. I just thought that was so brilliantly done.
Yeah, it was intricately plotted. Actually, why don't we just jump right to that question rather than—
Sure, go right ahead.
Because it was very intricately plotted and very complex. It's not a simple story. There's a lot of moving pieces in it. And we were wondering if maybe you could pull back the curtain just a little bit, because you do bounce back and forth, not just between points of view, but between, you take these same characters and are kind of moving them through time till they eventually come together. And how hard was that to plot?
Crazy hard. I don't know if you guys remember how I was just, we were all doing Step in the Story when I was the birth of Step into the Story when I was trying to plot this book. And it was the first time I had a storyboard and I was moving Post-its around. And as to your point, Donna, trying to make sure that the tension remained, the pacing was really difficult. And I felt like I just had to tell this story. And I think that what I didn't want to be was, okay, in the very beginning, you'll know if you read the first chapter, I kind of tell you what's going to happen in that first chapter. And then we go back in time and find out how we get to that point.
Right. So you're also bouncing into that what happened after the first chapter. You follow up on that too.
Right, right. So then so that timeline, and it probably would have been smarter to write the timeline separate and then try and figure it out. But no, I didn't.
That was my question.
I did not do that. I tried to write it as the reader would read it. And I can tell you that was probably maybe harder on me, but I think ultimately the structure of the book, it served the structure of the book.
Yep.
So better. So I would not recommend doing it that way. But I think the end result was I kept the tension high, because when I would start to go, wow, I feel like this is starting to slow down a little bit, I'm like, oh, this is probably the time. Let's find out what's really going on with Elsa now and what's going on and not just Elsa, but Hattie during the war.
Right.
So,
and I also found that it wasn't just that things had slowed and it was time to move to something else. It was the fact that you actually managed those transitions really well as well. So
thanks. Thank you.
Top marks for that.
Yeah. I wish I could tell you how I did it.
Well, are you normally a plotter or are you normally a pantser?
I've always been a character plotter. And I think, so the question, whenever anybody asks me that question, I can't answer it because I'm not a plotter. I can't say, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. I plot my characters deeply, deeply, deeply. And then I figure out what's the worst thing that can happen to them? How is the story going to work for them? Mm-hmm. Then I plot the historical timeline, and then I plug my story within the historical timeline. And so then, but now that I'm selling, like full proposals, and you have to write a really detailed synopsis, I'm plotting more than I ever did. And I'm finding as long as I stay true to those main points, the story, it's easier to stay on track. So I'm definitely more of a plotter than I've ever been.
I think you almost have to be, especially with when you're writing historical fiction, because there's certain things that happen within history that, it's going to dictate what your characters do. So But that's really interesting that you like kind of plot them separately, because I use plotter software, and it's the first time I've used it for doing my first historical. And yeah, I find I can separate the timelines out, and then I can see where the gaps are. I'm very visual, so that's really interesting. Like, we should maybe like have you back to talk about plotting on another day.
I would love that.
Where I tried Donna's method, and then I found it was a lot easier to write each person's storyline out.
That would have bothered me. Yeah, yeah.
Although it's not writing them out as a story, plotting them out. So I knew what each person's story was, and then I knew, because a lot of times I don't. It's supposed to be alternating, but I found that sometimes it didn't work. It would be like, oh no, it would be better to repeat this person's POV twice, and not necessarily.
Yeah, I do that. I do that. And I think ultimately, as you go along, it's whatever serves the story, right? Like, so. Anyway, yeah.
The story worked where I could go Elsa Hattie, Elsa Hattie, Elsa Hattie. The story that I just wrote, I could not do that. It just starts with the story.
Right. So, all right. So I have a couple of questions. So the first one I'm going to ask you is, there's been a real trend lately to write biographical historical fiction, so based on real people. And as most people who watch this show know, Barb and I have feelings about it. And that's not to say we don't enjoy it. Yeah, right. It's not to say we don't enjoy it. But sometimes there are limitations when you're writing that. So, but I also know that you based Hattie and Vera on the Cook sisters. So my question is, did you consider writing it as a biographical historical fiction using the Cook sisters, or was it always that you wanted it to be inspired by, and why?
Okay, good question. And I have feelings about I have similar feelings to you about the telling somebody else's story. So it would never occur to me, it was never even on the table that I would write Hattie and Vera as Ida and Louise Cook. Never once. It was always going to be an inspirational moment. Originally, I wanted Hattie to be the romance novelist, but it just didn't work for the story. And what really happened as I was thinking it up is that for me, when you read the actual, Ida wrote her autobiography, so I had her words. How easy would that have been just to fictionalize that? It would have been really easy. But I found she was her own person, and it wasn't a person that I personally connected to. So I was going to have a hard time writing that story to begin with, and I wouldn't have done it justice. And I found that I'm better at creating my own characters for my own story and just using that as a backdrop. I also found that they were spinsters, Ida and Louise, and I didn't want that. I wanted these people to be a little bit younger, a little more vibrant, a little bit more active. Ida and Louise kind of fell into refugee rescue, as opposed to I wanted it to be more of a more of a intentional decision.
Yeah, like a proactive. Well, you want proactive characters, right?
Yes, so. Yes, proactive characters. And then what happened was I needed and I wanted somebody that was inside Germany during all of this. And when Elsa was born in my mind, there was no way I could tell Hattie's story without Elsa. And Elsa really became the star of the book. Yeah. And so I felt as though Elsa was the one that had the story to tell. And that's what happened, really.
We should very quickly explain that the Cook sisters were real-life British sisters. Ida wrote for Mills and Boon, which is where we all came from as our original background. So we all know it because we were all shocked to hear that these two women who ran an underground railroad in Britain during World War II, that one of them worked all these years with people, and she never really talked about it until she wrote her autobiography. She was pretty quiet about it. So that's who the Cook sisters are for people who aren't familiar with the story.
And the other thing, too, is the Cook sisters stopped their efforts once the war began. And I didn't want to end my story once the war began.
Right.
That makes sense.
And you can understand that, though. Like, and I think that's part of the structure of your book as well, is that once the war begins and, the borders are all closed, and then it's almost impossible to get anybody out. So then, those efforts kind of stop, but then you really jump into 1943 and what's happening. So I think I'll ask my other question then, because that kind of leads right into it, which is the topic of forgiveness. Because as we get to the end, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but when we get to the end, Elsa just, I mean, we already said we love Elsa, and she's very warm and caring, and so, and that's shown in her friendship with Hattie. But when we get toward the end of the book, she really demonstrates forgiveness at a massive level. And I got to admit, because I've thought about forgiveness a lot over the years, and as I get older, there are lots of times when I've forgiven people. And so I don't hold any anger in my heart or any resentment necessarily, but I also don't, I close the door to letting them have any power to hurt me again. And so I'm not necessarily very generous to open. And so it actually has me questioning, like, whether or not I've really demonstrated forgiveness. So when you were writing that ending, did you consider having that play out a little bit differently than it did?
You know, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I felt like with Hattie was the character that I played out forgiveness being harder. And if you notice, that as Elsa asks Hattie to show forgiveness at the end, and Hattie was like, well, you've asked me, but I don't know if I can. And I'm going to do my best. And then even at the very end in the epilogue, you see that it hasn't really happened for her yet. There's this one moment where she's like, okay, well, maybe I can try. And so I played that out in Hattie. But with Elsa, in my own personal life, I had a person that I had to forgive and remain in relationship with. And I remember that I had this moment of aha, where this person was never going to ask for forgiveness from me. And I was going to have to figure out how to offer forgiveness to somebody that didn't want it, didn't ask it, didn't think they needed it, and then live with that decision. And so it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's been one of those things that I still struggle with. And I wanted to play that out on the page. So as we all know, as writers, I'm sorry to say to our readers listening, it can be very cathartic writing these stories. And for me, it was a very personal, if I can show it in Elsa, I'm getting kind of choked up here, and I can show this in a way that other people can understand that forgiveness is not about this person coming to you. And actually Elsa has the opportunity to offer the forgiveness because it's being asked of her. And I just wanted to say that, you know, I just wanted to have people think about that, and to think about what does forgiveness look like? And what if this person never asked and I still have to be in relationship with them? How do I go ahead with that?
I think that it's interesting. I think the reason it worked as well as it did in your story, because I think if it had been a different kind of storyline, I'm not sure if it would have been pulled off as well. I think it worked perfectly because of what those two particular characters had to share. Yeah. And when you share that kind of experience, that creates a different kind of bond between two people.
It is solidarity through adversity.
Right. True. And so at the very end, at the epilogue, when it's very clear she's gone beyond forgiving her, it makes sense given what they went through.
Yeah. You know,
otherwise I wouldn't have been able to buy that.
Pieces. I'd like to think that I threaded pieces throughout the story where Elsa was never going to give up on this character, even though this particular person in her life refused her love.
That's true.
So to speak. And she was not going to give up on that because she felt I don't know, you know, she felt very driven in all her relationships to be that person.
Yeah.
But you know, it's funny. When Barb was just talking about that, when you were talking about like solidarity through adversity, I used to watch a show ages ago called The Unit. And I know, right? So there's a scene in a season finale where one of the characters requires forgiveness, and the person who is hardest on her offers it, and what she says is, only those who have been bitten by the snake can tell you how it feels. And that's what made me think of that, because those two characters do share a really difficult experience, and that's something that's going to be very transformative for the rest of their lives. So that makes a whole lot of sense, Barb. But that's what that made me think of, was that only those who've been bitten by the snake can tell you how it feels.
Well, and if you want to go back to Hattie, I mean, it's not just that level of forgiveness. There's between her and her sister, there's events that she never quite gets over.
Hattie really, you know, I wanted to show Hattie to be more of how most of us are, where Hattie was very naive, I think, in her idealism and the way I wrote her, and her relationship. She'd always been taken care of by Vera. So when the cracks started showing in that relationship and she gravitates toward Elsa almost to fill that role in her life, I wanted to show that Hattie had a lot of growing up to do, and she did throughout the war. And then even, you know, as her relationship with Vera, it breaks apart, it fractures, but they still stay in relationship. Again, the same kind of thing. But there's never that moment where they broke apart and came back together. It was just over time, they created a new relationship as opposed to that old relationship.
Right.
So, yeah. This was a hard book to write, y'all.
It's very, very complex and very complicated. And I just want to kind of point out for the readers, because this book was put out by the Harlequin Love Inspired line, which is normally an inspirational imprint, but this is not an inspirational book, right? This is straight. Not
as in inspirational being a Christian, evangelical Christian book. It is not. I think I think there's inspiring moments in the book, but it's not a Christian evangelical book, nor is it a romance. And I think that I think I even had, you know, I'm sorry to say I do look at reviews. I know I'm not supposed to, but I saw that a man had read the book and he was like, oh, I didn't realize that Harlequin was the publisher. If I'd have known it was a romance, I wouldn't have picked it up. And I'm glad I did, because it's not a romance.
Exactly. And I don't want people to say, oh, look, Love Inspired is going to be an evangelical book. And there's nothing wrong with evangelical Christian books. But that's, if you're a historical fiction writer, I don't want them to, reader, I don't want you to think, oh, no, this isn't what I'm looking for. This is a World War II historical.
Correct. And I think that it's not to say that somebody that's an evangelical Christian can't pick this book up and see, you know, see the precepts of grace and forgiveness in the book, but it's not going to have scripture. They're not going to go to church. It's not going to be seeped in Christianity like a evangelical Christian book would be.
Yeah.
No, it's a fabulous, like I keep going back to the word complex, because it's just fabulously complex. There's a lot of layers going on.
And, you know, speaking as a former romance author, and I think all of you two know this as well, and we've talked about this when I was back in Step Into the Story, is that when we were writing romance, they weren't quite as, we thought we were writing, I thought I was writing complex books until I started writing these kind of books. And I realized how much harder it is to delve this deep into these characters and with the war's backdrop. But I can't write these books fast. One a year is actually hard, even.
It's intricate.
Very intricate. There's always moving pieces. And in this particular book, it's a lot about relationships.
Yes.
There's a lot of relationships, and they all change and evolve over the course of the book. And only one is a slightly romantic thread, but even that is more about trust and acceptance.
Yes.
And so, there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of people in here that play very important roles. There was one character. What happened to the conductor? You'll have to tell me off stage.
Well, you know, I would say that one of the things that people that have read it that have something negative to say so far about this book is there's a character that runs off to South America and they don't know what happened to him. And the reason that I left that, and I know that's why can't there be closure with that character? And it's because there wasn't closure with a lot of those Nazis and those Nazi sympathizers really until the 1980s, 70s, and 80s, 1990s. So I wanted it to be realistic. And if this person had, he had those really high contacts, you know, really within that huge amount of leadership, he was quite the opportunist. It's much more likely that he sneaked out of the country and lived a much richer life somewhere else under a different name than he ever would have been caught and arrested and made to pay for his sins. And as romance novelists and a lot of readers want that bow. They want to tie that up.
Yeah, and I think it was very in keeping with his character.
That he did kind of slither. He slithered out of the story, just like he kind of slithered in.
Yeah.
I think too, when you're talking about writing complex stories, the three of us were writing books that were most of the time between 50 and 60,000 words, which is very different than writing a historical novel that is, you know, somewhere between 70 to 100. Well, mine ended up at 105, which is the longest I've ever written. And that's just by its nature, you don't just fill that with fluff. You fill it with intricate plot lines, character development, historical happenings. So of course it's going to take longer to write, and it's just a different beast. And I use the word beast intentionally.
It's not just an animal, it's a beast.
It's a beast. Well, speaking of beasts, what is your next beast coming up?
As an aside, I am super excited for this third book. That's the one that excites me the most.
I'm excited for every Renee Bryant book.
My very first conversation with the editor I have now was that when books stop challenging me, then I'm done. Well, you know, for some reason, I keep making it harder on myself. So this next one is called The Paris Housekeeper. It comes out in 2023, again in December. And it opens the morning the Germans march on Paris. And it's told in three different perspectives, three women. One is a young woman working at the Hotel Ritz so she can send money to her starving family in northern France. Her fellow chambermaid is a young Jewish woman trying to stay alive. And the third is a wealthy American widow who lives in the Hotel Ritz with her own secret agenda. And so as the war unfolds, the three learn to sort of rely on each other, turn to each other, face each other during personal tragedy, during losses, and it all seems well until one of them makes this dangerous alliance that puts them all in jeopardy.
See, I'm excited about that one.
That's all I'm going to tell you.
I like that one. I mean, I'm not a huge World War II fan, but when you start pulling me in Paris again, I like that.
And you know, I know there's been a lot of World War II books written in Paris as the setting, and I really didn't know if I wanted to tackle it. I feel like I'm about, 5 to 8 years behind, but this story is so different from anything else that I've read that's been set in Paris. And again, my hallmark, I would like to think, is the character driven.
Yeah.
So each woman has a really strong character arc. So
I will read, well, you know me, I will read World War II like all the day long.
Same.
Yeah.
Barb's like, yeah.
No, I like, don't get me wrong. We've read a lot of World War II. And actually, I will, just as an aside, the last 3 books I've read have shown me about the German side of World War II in a much, in a very enlightening way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Barb, what's coming up for the rest of the month?
All right. So our featured author this month, in addition to Renee, is Serena Burdick. She wrote The Stolen Book of Evelyn Aubrey, which was one of my favorite books of 2022. Have you read it?
It's being shipped to me right now, by the way.
Really, really good. And you'll appreciate it, Renee, because this is the first book she ever wrote. And she's gone on to publish 4 or 5 or 6 historical fiction before this book got published.
Okay.
And you hear the story of what she went through. Like they made her take out a 3rd POV character. I mean, so you'd appreciate what she went through. And she's very fun. She's very likable. Everyone's going to really enjoy her and want to read her book. And then later this month, we're going to kick off our year-long novel writing course in the writing room with the first lecture is going to be on pre-planning and research. So we're super psyched about that. Yep. And then last, our February title, we're staying in World War II, sort of, is Daughters of Victory by Gabriella Saab.
Oh.
And yeah, I'm kind of excited for this one because what it does is follow a Russian woman from 1917 through the Russian front. And she's a revolutionary, but then you got assassins, you've got family secrets, secret granddaughter she didn't know existed, World War II resistance. It just sounds like there's a lot of intrigue and we don't get a lot of stories from Russia. So whenever you find one, it's kind of a neat take on World War II. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And it comes out on the 24th, right?
It does. Comes out on
That's
the 24th. So when you're out at the store buying Renee's book, The Secret Society of Salzburg, you also should pre-order Daughters of Victory by Gabriella Saab, so that you can read that one. So when we're talking about it on February 7th, you know what we're talking about. And but first read Secret Society of Salzburg, because it really is a fantastic book. It came out at an awkward time, 2 days after Christmas, so we're trying our best to get the word out.
That's all right. People have new e-readers and gift cards.
And from the looks of the rankings, people are discovering the book. So
early. And it's at Costco too, so you can go to your local Costco.
Right next to Prince Harry. So
all right, another conversation.
Another conversation. I say buy Secret Society of Salzburg. I just say that. So. Yeah. And by the way, just so you know, you can purchase all these books through our website. We have a shop that on bookstop.org.
Bookshop.org, yeah.
.org, and a portion of the money goes to support local independent bookshops, which
I like that.
You know we love local independent bookstores. So it's going to be a very busy month. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this post. And also, if you want to join the conversation, you can come to our Facebook group, which is facebook.com/groups/stepintothestory.
That's it.
That is it. So thanks for coming, Renee. Come back again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Love you here again.
Love you here again. Keep writing these books.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was so fun.
All right.
We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.